Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again this evening to Wednesday night with Inayet Wadee. And as we welcome you to the show this evening, it comes at a time where the situation on the ground, in the aftermath of the looting and the chaos, the anarchy that we have seen. Now, this obviously has resulted in a situation where many of us need to do introspection and to see how far we have come as a country, how far we have come as a democracy, and are we truly a rainbow nation that we are proud of? These obviously are desperate times. It requires solidarity in action. And we know for the fact the sequence of events that had taken place, it has taken different dimensions. We started off with the imprisonment of the former president, Jacob Zuma. Then we've seen the criminality, we've seen the looting that followed. We've seen reasons being given about South Africa being ripe for a revolution. And this was long coming because the poor had woken up to reality in South Africa, considering we have been one of the most unequal societies in the world. But also at the same time, we've seen politicians, we've seen prominent people encouraging the anarchy, and we've seen this through social media, through other platforms. And also, we have heard about an attempted coup and a form of insurrection in the country. And this looting was deliberate, it was planned, it was coordinated. And later on, this actually changed to racism. And this is after what had happened in Phoenix, the killings that had taken place in Phoenix. Now, having said all of that and asking the question, is racism and chaos a camouflage for anarchy in South Africa? We have assembled quite a panel this evening, but before we get to the panel, we also want to welcome our listeners who have joined in from the various media houses and radio stations. We welcome the CII listeners together with Sirius FM and Radio Al Ansar. CII is on channel 865 of DSTV and free to air. Al Ansar on 90.4 FM in Durban, 105.6 FM Pietermaritzburg, and Sirius FM on the East Rand, 105.7 FM. We welcome all of you. We welcome listeners on the various platforms and also on the platforms of Salam Media, on YouTube, on Facebook, and wherever else, whatever platform you are listening to us on. Now, just to introduce a panel to you this evening, we are joined by Thapelo Mohapi, and he is with the Abahlali Base Mjondolo. We also will be joined by Advocate Mohamed Saleem Khan, SC, Aisha Nontobeko Mkhwanazi, journalist and activist, and also we've got Pastor Lazarus Pillay, a community activist, and Neeshan Balton from the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. To all the panelists, assalamu alaikum, good evening, and welcome to you.
Wa alaikum
assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Well, it's wonderful that all of you are able to join us this evening. Now, obviously, Neeshan, I think I'm going to start off with you. And we've seen the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation issue a statement in the aftermath of what has happened, and a lot has basically taken place. But just to go quickly through the panel, just to introduce yourself and just, a brief introduction on the topic that we are talking about, and then we will get into the details. So, Neeshan, if you could unmute your mic, over to you.
Good evening and greetings to your viewers and listeners. I'm Neeshan Balton, the Executive Director of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. I think what we've seen in the last 2 weeks is an attempt to evade justice, to weaken our democracy, but happily it has failed. The majority of people have stood up to this anarchy and have protected our democracy in the best way that they could. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Neeshan. We're going across now, Pastor Lazarus Pillay.
Good evening, Mr. Wadee. Good evening to the listeners. Good evening to the viewers. And once again, thank you for the invite for this wonderful program. Yes, it's been a very tense week. And I think many of my colleagues on the panel will share on different views. But unfortunately, it has been a very unfortunate time for our democracy. It's been a very unfortunate time for our communities. Many of our communities were taken aback. And as you said in the opening statement, that yes, it's been a few different narratives. The narratives were unclear. But I think today we're going to speak about what has come out of this challenge and what has come out of this so-called, unfortunate circumstance. So, yeah, we'll get into that later.
Thank you for that, Pastor Lazarus. Nontobeko Mkhwanazi.
Assalamu alaikum once again, and shukran for the opportunity. I think there's a lot that has been happening in South Africa, and I think with everything happening, a lot has come out of it, and a lot of things that continue to sort of make our lives a living hell have also resurfaced, and things that were happening in corners have also resurfaced. So yeah. Thank you very much for having me, and yeah.
Shukran for that, Advocate Mohammed Saleem Khan. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Listeners, I often say, like cross-examination in a court of law is a double-edged sword, so too the occurrences of some 2 weeks ago are also a double-edged sword. There were advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that the civilians of the Republic of South Africa have exercised a singular vote for democracy and justice. They have reacted positively to resisting the anarchic attempt to destabilize the country. It's positive in the sense that the elements who were responsible for this attempt at anarchy now realize that they will encounter resistance from the man in the street, from the man at grassroots level. And that is the positive message that has emanated from these recent developments. It is unfortunate that lives had to be lost. It is unfortunate that people in authority, so rumors go, have been responsible for this anarchic attempt. But at the end of the day, the result has been a positive one. There has been a singular vote for peaceful coexistence. There has been a singular vote for democracy.
Yes, obviously we will unpack some of the issues that you have just mentioned, Advocate Mohammed Saleem. Thapelo, if you could unmute, just a brief introduction as well.
Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is Thapelo Mohapi. I'm the spokesperson of Abahlali Mjondolo. It's a grassroots social movement that works with the impoverished from the shack dwellers movement. In the last few weeks, what we have seen was, of course, the factional battles of the ANC that has shown us that the leadership of the ANC does not care about the poor and marginalized, but the positions that they hold in the party and also in parliament. So what we've seen battles between two forces that led to the people on the ground. But I would like to echo the sentiments of the advocates that for the first time, the poor were now in the eyes of the rich and the elite. For the first time, we have realized that there are people who are struggling. There's starvation, there's hunger in this country. Maybe we have heard it, but we have seen it with our eyes this time around. And maybe our government will act with immediate facts to actually deal with what we have seen with our eyes.
Thank you for that, Thapelo. Now, just to get into the detail now, Neeshan, obviously to start off with you now, Neeshan, 27 years later, South Africa being a democracy, and tonight, on the 28th of July, we're sitting and we're unpacking and we're trying to figure out where have we gone wrong. Now, obviously, what we've seen happen in terms of the anarchy and the looting has been a culmination of problems that the country has experienced for a very, very long time. And would you say that the chickens have come home to roost now?
No, I wouldn't say that, because that would simply say that what has happened here was almost inevitable. What has happened here was orchestrated, was planned, and was an effort to really destabilize a government and a democracy. Now that took place against the backdrop of a country that is struggling with issues of its racialized past, of deep and systemic racism, as well as deep structural inequality and poverty and hunger in this country. But I wouldn't say that it was inevitable, simply because if you look at what really happened here, this wasn't totally a riot by the poor. There were millions of poor people who didn't take part in what has happened here. And I think it would be an insult to many of the poor in this country, the vast majority, to basically categorize them all as looters. This year, I think we must be clear, as my comrade from Abahlali says, has its roots in the political fights of this country that has spilled over into the governance issues of this country. And ultimately, it's a battle between whether corruption triumphs in this country or whether our constitutional democracy will prevail. At this point in time, it has shown its resilience, and I hope that continues in the weeks and years ahead.
Well, thank you for that, Neeshan. And just to bring Thapelo now, Thapelo, obviously your organization has issued a statement, and you've spoken extensively. You've spoken about the ruling party and looking at the people you represent. And when one looks at some of the issues, and I painted the picture in my introduction, where initially it was about Jacob Zuma, then it changed to people are hungry. It was about poverty. Then we've heard about insurrection. We've heard about the coup in the country. Now it's become a racist issue as well. So this narrative has actually been changing over a period of time. And we've got to a stage now where the total focus is on racism and everything else seems to have been forgotten.
Yes, thank you very much. I think mostly I think we must all admit that there is a deep economic, socio-economic issues that have been faced with this country. If you look at the informal settlement, people go to sleep on a daily basis, not knowing where their next bread will come from. If you look at the services that are provided in the informal settlements, women are still raped on their way to find the toilets. Toilets are very far. There is no form of sanitation. And this is happening 27 years later, post-apartheid. And we are still living under this. That deep corruption, and I must emphasize this on this today, that what robs the poorest of the poor of services, of a better life, is those who continue to steal. And I'm happy that to some extent the ANC, this current administration, is actually dealing with that. But I mean, the deep fundamental issue here is that the issue of corruption has robbed us. I mean, if you look at the 500 billion that was stolen in the midst of a pandemic, where the poorest of the poor are suffering. So these are some of the issues that we are facing. These are the underlying issues that we are facing. It is unfortunate what has happened in Phoenix. And I want to make it very clear, because we do not want to say that the Indian community is racist. When a few anarchists, a few individuals carry out things that are wrong, of criminality, we must isolate those people. We must say those people do not belong to our society. And I'm happy that we're working with the Phoenix Residents Association in Phoenix. We have seen that some of the people who were in the WhatsApp groups of the community who were racist were kicked out of these WhatsApp groups, which means that there is a majority of the people in the Phoenix area on its own who disagree on this. Indian people are not racist in nature. I grew up in Pambai where this violence was happening. I mean, when there was violence with back then with the IFP and the ANC, we used to run and seek refuge in the Phoenix area. So for me, I think this is a point and a step that I take, that the Indian community has never been racist. So when a few individuals decide to identify people according to race and kill them, we must not go deep into saying that there is deep racism within the community. There's just a few individuals who are actually making a bad name. And there's a need for reconciliation between those communities, and we need to discuss so that innocent lives could never be lost again.
Yes, I'd like to just bring Aisha into the discussion. Now, Aisha, you've heard what Thapelo has to say, and also in terms of what Neeshan has to say. And looking at the sequence of events and what had basically taken place. And obviously, it's sad that we've got to a stage where racism is now dominating the what has basically happened. But I think the key issue here is looking at us as a society in South Africa, looking at the social order in the country, looking at social cohesion. And, coming from your background, from a journalist background as well, and someone who's been an activist, now understanding what this type of behavior does for social cohesion in the country. We've made great strides in bringing the country together. We've become a rainbow nation. We've, with pride, we've boasted about being a rainbow nation, about having the best constitution in the country. But when events like these take place, when we see disasters like these take place in the country, obviously it paints a totally different picture. If you could unmute, please, Aisha. Sorry, Aisha, you need to unmute.
It's unmuted. Can you
Right.
hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, as I was saying, that the first question we should be asking ourselves is, are we really a rainbow nation? Or do we carry the name to sort of brush off all the issues that we face on the ground? Because it's an unknown truth that there are mothers out there who work for Indian families and they face extreme conditions at the hands of our fellow Muslim and Indian brothers and sisters, not only Muslims, but Indians in general. So now with this whole incident of Phoenix happening, it's sort of, it comes close to the people of Black descent that are really Indians welcoming to us. You understand? It's a matter of, okay, everything is fine. We are happy. We are all a rainbow nation. But there are underlying issues that are never discussed. Everybody just happens to discuss them in different corners. Currently, there's a lot of things happening here in Durban where there are Indians who are threatening lives of fellow Black people, all in the name of you looted in Phoenix and now you Black people are crying and saying that, hey, we are now being targeted and all of that, yet you were looting and that's why you got shot. But nobody's really looking at the underlying circumstances that some of the people who were shot in Phoenix were innocent. They were just shot. Now, it therefore comes to this. Yes, we say we are a rainbow nation, but there are issues on the ground, issues of racism that continue happening. Just because a few people have racial comments, yes, it does not mean they are racist, but are there few people or other people who pass racist remarks and then brush it off as a matter of fact, oh, I didn't kill a person, but, it still is a form of racism. So
Yes.
in my stance right now is, yes, the Phoenix saga happened. And yes, it brought out a whole lot of issues. So therefore, how do we then fix it? And to my surprise, you found a lot of Indian organizations not saying anything about it, yet it affects everybody, Black, Indian, even whites. Because there are Indian people who have shops that solemnly depend on Black people buying on them. And now it will affect their business, but they are quiet. Nobody is actually coming up and saying, you know what is happening is wrong. And that on its own, then makes Black people question that what is our stance? This whole rainbow nation that we speak about, what is it really a rainbow nation?
Yes, shukran for that, Aisha. Advocate Mohamed, Saleem, do you concur with what Aisha had said? Now, obviously, we regret the loss of life, and it's sad that it got to a stage where people killed, and there were innocent people that were killed as well. But in all fairness, and from what Aisha is saying, obviously, Indian people, and should we be singling out Indian people in a situation like this, considering the fact that when one looks at the anarchy was directed right across the board. It was not only Indian people that had suffered the loss, it was basically right across the entire board, including Blacks. We've seen many shopping malls in the townships being burnt to the ground. We've seen, obviously, one of the biggest problems there was the delay, the response on the part of the government as well, who had not woken up. Now, whether it had been the intelligence, whether it's the police services, whether it's the defense force, one would never know. But in all fairness, is it fair to single out a community in a situation like this?
One must adopt an objective and a fair view. In one's emotional reaction to developments, the tendency is to inadvertently subvert the truth. And I say that advisedly. Now let's look at the facts. The fact of the situation and the fact of the matter is the two communities, and it's unfortunate that we have to distinguish. We're all people of South Africa, and it is unfortunate that we have to distinguish between Indian people and so-called Indian people and so-called African people. I don't use the term blacks because I consider us all to be blacks. Now the position is in fact this, and this is indubitable. The two communities coexisted peacefully. One did not attack the other. There was no reason or cause for any attacks. Then there came the uprising, the plundering and the looting, occasioned, so it is rumored, by anarchic elements that exploited the impoverished circumstances of the poor in Bambai, the greater Inanda area, Amauti, etc., areas neighboring on Phoenix, and also in other areas. This exploitation, coupled with the influence to rebel and to loot and to plunder on these impoverished people, gave rise to the circumstances that characterized these incidents approximately 2 weeks ago, that culminated in a reaction from civilians in South Africa. Let us not isolate any particular racial group, Inayet. If you go to Umhlanga, there were many people, so-called white people, who formed neighborhood watches, barriers, etc., who were armed and who were prepared to defend themselves and defend the property. So they were armed. It's just that the uprising was extremely intense in the Phoenix area. And the people who defended themselves were not limited or restricted to people of so-called Indian descent. I've seen video footage of so-called African people who participated in manning roadblocks, etc., who were protecting themselves and protecting their properties. So let us not stigmatize the Indian community, Aisha and others. These are people, and they reacted to an attack against property, an attack against their lives, and they had to defend themselves as best they could. So the situation was likened to a type of war, a minuscule war. And as you know, when you participate in this type of rebellious conduct, then you defend yourself. Now, any person who has any knowledge of military operations or the martial arts will tell you that the best form of defense is to attack. So one, confronted with the plundering and looting, and all you need do is look at the video footage of the nature of the destruction. There were streets of shops that had been destroyed. There were huge wholesale outlets. Central Durban is feeling the impact of supermarkets being non-functional as a result of the destructive conduct of the plunderers and looters. Now, in essence, the reaction you saw was a reaction of self-defense. It was a reaction of defense of property. Now, what does the law say? Our law provides that a person is entitled to defend himself, to defend others. That is known as self-defense, and to defend the destruction, serious destruction of property. So in this particular case, let us not forget the proper historical occurrence. There was a plundering, there was a looting, there was a threat to lives, and there was a reaction. That was self-defense, defense of people, defense of property. To the extent that people might have exceeded the bounds of self-defense, that constitutes criminality. And they must be brought to book, and the criminal justice system will address that. As the criminal justice system is expected to address the criminal conduct of the plunderers and looters, and many plunderers and looters were arrested and are still in custody. And there are people who are in custody who exceeded the bounds of self-defense. Let us be objective people. Let us not go into this diatribe of, well, Indians did this and Indians did that, and they went out and attacked. Let's not forget what caused the attack. They were coexisting peacefully. The reaction was a result of the uprising, of the looting, of the plundering, and to the extent that people, whoever they are, whether they're Indians or whether they're non-Indians, does not make a difference. To the extent that they infringe the law, they must meet the consequences. The criminal justice system must address that. And I think Aisha made reference now to how domestic assistants are treated by their employers. Now, there's laws relating to that, Aisha. If an employer is mistreating or abusing an employee, there are laws in relation to that. There are laws relating to minimum amounts of salary and conditions of work, etc. So should there be an infringement in that respect, then please institute proper proceedings. Let there be proper proceedings and go and lodge reports. I mean, there's the Department of Manpower, there's the CCMA, there's the Bargaining Council. There are proper facilities which you can use in order to address the problems you have. Don't, in a forum of this nature, where there's been an uprising, where there's been this anarchic influence, raise matters which can be dealt with in terms of the law.
Yes, shukran for that. Pastor Lazarus, if you could unmute your mic, please, just to bring you in. Now, obviously, Pastor, you've been on the ground. You've seen what has happened. You're on the ground with the people. You've been involved with the people as well. And just looking at, and also following up from the point that Advocate Mohamed Saleem has now raised, where, using a forum like this to bring out, some of the historical issues and some of the issues that we've seen come out. For instance, the one with regard to domestic workers is just one example. But we've seen so much more come out. Yet you have been involved. You've been with a community that has coexisted as brothers and sisters for a very, very long time.
Thank you. Yeah. In response to my fellow colleagues, and I think everyone has sufficiently placed before the viewership and the listenership tonight about the challenges out there. And I just want to not want to repeat some of the things, because we are here today to draw and submit constructive criticism and constructive contributions. A lot of community activity at the moment right now has a common thread, and the common thread is that everybody is naturally reacting to restoration. I don't think there is other forces that are maybe disappointed that that our fellow colleagues have also mentioned, that there are inciters and there are architects of such design here to bring in anarchy and to create instability and to demoralize our country and our democracy, our ardent democracy. But to respond to Thapelo, what Thapelo had just said earlier, I mean, the evidence must see that there is a breakdown of structures, and the breakdown of structures within the ruling party and the government is very evident. And I think that's one of the disappointments that is reflecting out there by communities. Now, yes, there are a lot of emotions rising up at the moment, but we must also be cognizant of the circumstantial issues that we have around us. We might not be privileged to address some of these issues right now, as much as they are important. Issues such as racism, issues such as other things that have come up, and whether the government issues and structures issues, all of that there. But we are a country that has poses so much of other inadequacies, and that is, for example, our unemployment rate is quite high, our poverty is quite high, our social impacts, our social ills, all of these things are at a negative and a high at the moment. And a circumstantial issue of this such anarchy, and whether it's structured, having a third force, or it had other agendas, by the way, is we cannot throw the baby out with the bathwater. Many of us know the story of Solomon when he was dealing with a community at large. Two mothers were fighting for a baby because the one baby had died and the other baby was wanting to be hijacked by the one mother. Solomon, in all his wisdom, had to use the story of, let me cut the baby enough. And what we have right now, we have communities, we have activism right now on the ground that don't care, and I say this very respectfully, don't care of how our hard-earned democracy and our communities are. We don't care that they're vulnerable in our communities. We have children, we have freedom children that have no absolute understanding of all the things we talk. And we are ready to cut the baby up in half by having conversations. And not about this on the platform, but generally because I'm on the ground and I've got so much of advocacy happening at the moment. But the common thread is everybody is saying, how do we position ourselves for restoration, healing? Now, the other flip side of that is, do we put a band-aid on a very, very infected wound? Do we bandage it on an infected wound? Yes, infection has been brewing for the past 27 years. There are communities at large, and especially from our African brothers, that raise concerns that go back many years. And I've been involved in some of this dialogues right now, and the sad thing is, as my colleagues have said, that we are lacking the voice of leadership, and leadership is not consistent in its presentations, and also not resolutions are not coming out of those there's so many different narratives, and one has to unpack these narratives. And as Advocate Saleem said, it was reactive, and the reaction was because of anarchy. And I know the subject says, is it a camouflage? And I think before we get to the subject point is, we have to understand that nobody expected that there was going to be such reaction, and therefore reaction calls for reactiveness, and people naturally, instinctively, I mean, if all of us in this place right now, if any of you got burnt with a match or a cigarette or whatever, and naturally the stimulus is going to be the reactive, and whatever your brain is going to tell you to do first, you're going to do. Nobody at that moment were in their normal senses, whether they were politically correct, politically incorrect, whether they were socially correct. It was just reactive, and communities reacted the best way because they did not know what was the full agenda. All they knew there was looting, all they knew there was robbing, all they knew there was anarchy, and they reacted. So we must be slow to judge that reaction, because in the few days of that reaction, many communities stopped for a moment and said, hey, what's happening here? There's looting, and what is the agenda? So it gave people time to discuss, because many of these communities don't even interact. Living in some of the suburbs, they don't even interact. This was the first time many communities started to interact, they started to communicate, and they got out there. So there, in my personal view, there was not any pre-planned issues happened in most cases, because they just started communicating. And the communication brought people to a place of saying, it's reactive, as Advocate Saleem had said. And the one thing I want to say before maybe you want to have someone else chat is, we got to understand, we are not living in a normal day in this world. It's not a normal day. 2020, we all woke up to a whole new world. So apart from South Africa, we got to understand, we are not evaluating the situation on a normal world. We have a global crisis, And whether it's evidential or no evidence to this point, but if we look at the DNA of the global situation of the design of anarchy, anarchy is basically thrown on the world, not just in South Africa. And anarchy has came as the design of COVID, and COVID was to bring out anarchy. Yes, I'm not discounting the fact that we've got issues in our country. I'm not discounting the fact we've got problems in our country. I'm not discounting the fact that this circumstances happened, brought out a whole lot of issues. But we've got to have a dual view of a global view and local view, because COVID 2019 has given us a whole new backdrop. You look at all the civil unrest happening out in Venezuela, what happened in Hong Kong, what happened in Thailand, what happened in all these countries, what happened in Swaziland a couple of weeks ago, what's happening in other parts of, in Uganda, we've had problems in Zimbabwe, all of there, and it's not an excuse. So we got to have this global view as to it's not a normal world, and we've got to view this thing as two things, that we have a global strategist and we probably have local strategists, and each one of them may have maximized these issues. So yes, there is lots of platforms happening right now, a lot of initiatives, and the discussion at the moment right now is, yes, we need to deal with things on a resolution basis, but at the moment right now, we got to first put the fire off. You cannot talk these kind of linguistics when a fire is burning. I always use this analogy. When a house is burning, nobody runs inside to go and clean out the ashtrays. And we got to understand what are the critical subjects right now that we need to take. Yes, we got to deal. If there's any evidence of criminality, as Advocate Saleem said, then the full might of the law must take its course, because legislation is legislation. Legislation cannot change for social issues. We have a constitution, we have law and order needs not to even speak about race. And even if it's the Indian community, for example, that acted unlawfully, they must be brought to book. And I want to firstly publicly criticize and condemn lawlessness, and especially murder. There's no way we can justify killing of a human being in any sense. And yes, I must apologize, because apologies has not come out openly and quick enough out there to the communities. And there was, as Thapelo said, there was and dear sister said, there's a lot of silence from a lot of part of the communities, and we don't want to stigmatize communities like we've said right now. But the main thing is that we got to understand it from all these facets, that ultimately fire is burning communities, and that's what South Africa is good for. And the good thing that came out of all of this is we saw the ability of the self ability from communities and society and South African to heal itself. And like, for example, the first 4 days of the crisis, people realized there was no petrol, there was no food. Nobody complained whether it was race, whether it was anarchy, whether it was politicized, whether it was not politicized. Communities rally together from all parts of the province, and that's what South Africans do. They know how to rally against when there's a challenge, and it's the same way we'll deal with things, whether it's COVID, whether it's a storm, whether there's a bomb blast, whether there's there's a tsunami, whether there's whatever. South Africa knows how to react, and it doesn't look at race, it doesn't look at color, it doesn't look at social divides. It just gets to the bottom of it and deals with the issue. And what was the issue? There was no bread, there was no fuel, there was no medicines, there was no stores. People opened up makeshift stores, and everybody needed. And you look at the lines there. On the next day, people were standing in colors, standing in all different colors. People were communicating. And where is this so-called narrative now that we have this issue? Yes, I'm saying it might be brute to a certain degree, but if you look at what happened in the same week of the crisis, it was people of all different races and colors. They stood next to shopping centers waiting to get a loaf of bread, waiting to get, there, whether you was rich, whether you're poor, whether you're from the suburbs, whether you're from wherever, all stood in the lines and all waited for bread, all waited for milk. And I think that was a message that Thapelo is also saying. It brought out a lot from communities and realized, hang on, we now can identify with each other, because imagine if we don't get bread, what happens? If we can't get milk, and what happens? You know what I'm saying? And on the flip side of it, we've had also no control. So I want to just say there's multiples, and we got to deal with the multiples and the tentacles and the way it has grown. And we're not going to win. South Africa is not going to win. At the moment, our crisis is in a situation, the house is burning. We do realize we have to address lots of things, but we need to address it when the fire has been. Sending out social media when they used when social media was used as a weapon, okay? So much was used as a weapon. How do you now try to destabilize something in the territory of what was used as a weapon? And some communities don't respond that way. Lots of communities do their things in their own way. They do things beyond the radar. Not many people like to be in the front line. A lot of people like to be on the screen.
Pastor, can I just stop you there for a second, please? I just want to remind our listeners on the various radio stations and platforms, we have got a question that is running across the screen. But for those who are listening to us on audio, we are raising this question: in whose interest was the SA shutdown chaotic, and why are people still isolated 27 years into our democracy? You can WhatsApp us with your comments on 061 766 0355, 061 766 0355. You can also post your comments on the various platforms of Salam Media, on the Facebook page, and also on the YouTube channel. Now, coming through to Thapelo, and Thapelo, you've obviously issued a statement, and Pastor Lazarus alluded to leadership. Now, one issue here in your statement, you speak about racial incitement. Now, that seems to be problematic in this country, because it is not only what has happened in the month of July. We've seen it in the past. We've seen xenophobia rearing its ugly head in the country, and it does appear as if this sort of incitement is an ongoing phenomenon in this country. And also at the same time, in your statement, you speak about leadership. You speak about, who at the end of the day is responsible in terms of inciting people to conduct them in the manner that they had as well. So on the one hand, in us, we've been trying to deal with xenophobia. We've been trying to deal with, and here again, we see this, and sometimes we see prominent people, sadly, on social media and other platforms, inciting this very behavior that we're talking about.
I think first and foremost, we should all be approaching this issue in a way that our former leader, our former statesmen would have approached it. Nelson Mandela would have not wanted us to be in this crisis where we are today, and it's very shameful for that we are here today. It's very shameful. He must be, not very proud of us for what has happened in this country. I think I must first and foremost say that in our movement, we have a saying that says a human being is a human being wherever and whenever they find themselves. We say that umuntu ngabantu, a person is a person because of others. And we believe that in a society that is equal, a society where everyone is treated with dignity, regardless of their socio-economic status, we have always fought against any form of xenophobia, any form of racism that comes in line. And I must say that we believe that the right to life comes before anything else. It comes before property, it comes before anything else. And I think as much as we are focusing mainly on the unrest and the looting that took place, we must be realistic that there might be a number of people who did not go and take food. But there were those who went and took food because they were desperate. When you have a mother and a father and a child going into a store and taking cooking oil and taking a meal, then we must realize that we are in a serious and dire problem that are taking place in our country. Right now, the police are in this operation, Show Your Sleep. And the only people who are targeted are the poorest of the poor in the informal settlements. And of course, as I say, the poorest of the poor I'm taking into the fact that there are Indian people who are living in informal settlement that are our members. There are people who are colored people who are living in the informal settlement. There are white people who are living there. There are African people that are there. It is unfortunate that we are still actually having categories of people, as I have spoken. I'm saying that a human being should be realized. We should see a human being. When somebody breeds, it doesn't matter which age they breed, whether it's a middle class or poor, but that is a life that we need to protect according to the Bill of Rights. That is a life that we need to protect according to our Constitution, and which is why we are today standing firm and saying that we need to protect our Constitution, because it is the only thing that stands against any form of repression that we are going to receive, whether from the police that undermines the poorest of the poor, the dignity of the poor, whether it's the politicians who continuously violate the poorest of the poor by not providing services. So as much as we are approaching this topic, I think one needs to realize that a human being is a human being, regardless of their socio-economic status, and that even though there were looters who took things that were not necessary, but there were people who took basic needs, and the police are targeting them and they're taking their food. The situation right now in the informal settlements, my colleague, my comrade, a comrade of mine, were in fact bullied by police when we were actually sending some milk around. And I must say this because I'm very cautious of the fact that when we say a certain race group is racist, you are actually involving a number of people that are not supposed to be there. During a crisis where there was no food in the shops, when there were innocent people who did not loot or go into the shop and take some food, there were those who could not get food in the supermarket as a result of there was no food. There were those who lost their job as a result of this. And therefore, the reality was that there was starvation and hunger. And the Muslim community in Durban came around and provided some milk and bread. We went with our bakkies around the city, and we started delivering this bread in the community. And we saw the lines, the queues, mothers with their babies at their back. So I'm saying that let's approach this issue in a very serious matter, that there are real life, the reality on the ground is that people are starving, people are suffering, and people have been suffering. And we have been saying this to the government, and the government has never done anything about it, whether it's the Zuma administration and this current administration. The poorest of the poor continues to be poor, while the rich are getting richer. And that's why some people went and say, let's take the opportunity to have the food that we have not been able to get for years.
Thank you for that, Thapelo. Neeshan, to bring you into the discussion now. Neeshan, I'm just reading out from the statement that the Kathrada Foundation had issued. And you speak about the racial narrative peddlers who seek to divert attention away from the instigators of the failed insurrection. Now, I know this whole question surrounding a coup and insurrection has been another debating point. But this is extremely important. This is critical because we've heard also about other forces that have obviously been operating and taking advantage of the situation that we find ourselves in, Neeshan.
Well, precisely. And I think we must go back, as I think Advocate Saleem Khan has said, and Thapelo and Pastor Lazarus have alluded to, that what has happened here is not by coincidence. This is by design. It is planned. If you look at just the scale of social media output in the weekend that the former president was supposed to have been arrested, flowing from that time, the range of commentary that alluded to violence, alluded to anarchy, was very clear, was very blatant.
And, can I just ask you to raise your volume slightly, please? You are sounding a bit faint.
Okay, let me try. That's in full now. Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
Much better.
Now, if you look at the infrastructure that has been damaged 45 warehouses, almost 22 factories, 8 banks, 88 ATMs, 139 schools. I think it's about 100 plus cell phone towers, community radio stations. There were attempts to sabotage water and electricity. And prior to that, it was the main freeways that were in fact attacked. Now, that is not an uprising of the poor. That is the usage of the poor, using issues of poverty to enhance the chaos that was in fact unleashed. And if you look at what are some of the key demands that have emerged since then? It has been a demand that the former President Zuma is released, that all future charges against him are dropped, and not only from and that the Zondo Commission be scrapped, and its findings in fact be disregarded in advance of them having been made. So what does this tell you? It tells you that all of those who are likely to be implicated by that commission on issues of state capture, as well as those who are currently before the courts, have really sent out a message here: if you dare come for us, this is what we will do to this country. And we will use the poverty we will exploit the issues of poverty in this country that we help to create through our acts of corruption to now further the chaos. And the end game here is to get back into political office so that all of these people who have benefited and whose benefits from corruption have been stopped in some particular way need to now get back lost ground and lost money. And ultimately, bear in mind that the 50 billion that the Gupta family are said to have taken out of this country, much of that money at the Zondo Commission, there was, I think, very clear and a clear idea that a lot of that has been filtered back to support all kinds of activities to undermine the Ramaphosa administration and to undermine democracy in this country. So we mustn't be blind to what the agenda is here. I do think that, as I said, this is done in a country where it is not a rainbow nation. It has aspired to become a rainbow nation. I think we use that term incorrectly. Archbishop Tutu was referring to something that we need to aspire to become, not what we are. I don't think we can overcome issues of a racialized past in the short period of time that we have. Certainly, this government should have done much more. In 2001, almost 25 years ago or more, 20 years ago, the World Conference Against Racism took place in this country. One of the outcomes of that conference was that every country had to develop a national action plan to combat racism and to mobilize society against racism, and not at a very shallow level. Our government only adopted a finalized national action plan in late 2019, 2020. Now that tells you just the kind of lethargy that existed to provide the leadership and the guidance and the plan that's needed to deal with these kinds of things. We have had social cohesion exercises that, in my view, have been publicity stunts, PR work at best, but they're also short-term. They're very short-term work. I think as Thapelo and the pastor would know, that if you're going to do serious dialogue work amongst communities that have historical divisions and who have existing prejudices about each other that are deep, if you want to get people to cross bridges, it requires consistent work over decades. This work doesn't happen in our schools, it doesn't happen in our universities, it doesn't happen in any institutions of society on a consistent basis. This is perhaps one of the few countries you can become a judge in this country without having gone through any anti-racism program. You can become an engineer in this country without understanding issues of, in any profession. You would be ill-equipped to understand issues of race and racism and our history, our racialized history. And we then expect people who don't have that understanding to then find solutions to problems that they now have to deal with. These are the issues that get exploited by the kind of racialized narrative peddlers that our statement refers to. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Neeshan. And just to the panelists, we're going to go for a quick break. We'll be back in a few minutes. The time is just gone 7 p.m. As we continue with this evening broadcast. This is Wednesday Night Live with Inayet, Wadee, and we continue being in the company of our listeners on the various platforms of Salam Media, also Al Ansar in Durban, 90.4 FM and 105.6 FM in Pietermaritzburg, 105.7 FM, and that is Sirius FM on the East Rand. Also, our CII listeners on channel 865 on DSTV and free-to-air platform. We welcome you back to the show, and we have got a panel that we have assembled tonight against the theme, Is Racism and Chaos a Camouflage for Anarchy in South Africa? The panel, we have got Thapelo Mohapi, we've got Advocate Mohamed Saleem Khan, Nontobeko Mkhwanazi, we've got Pastor Lazarus Pillay and Neeshan Balton, who are all part of the panel this evening. Now, just to continue and also to remind our viewers and listeners that we have got a question that is running across the screen. We'd like your thoughts. In whose interest was the SA shutdown chaotic, and why are people still isolated or feeling isolated 27 years into democracy? You can WhatsApp us with your comments on 061 766 0355. Aisha, you with us? I see Aisha is trying to connect again. Thapelo as well. I see Advocate Mohamed Saleem and also Neeshan. Aisha, just to get to you, if you could unmute your mic, please.
Yes.
Right, Aisha, looking at obviously what Neeshan has been saying as well, and where we are at this point in time. Now, obviously, there are many issues. There are a number of issues that have come out as a result of what we have seen taking place in the last few weeks. Now, this tells us that we have got a serious problem as communities. We have a serious problem as societies as well. And to move forward and to find common ground where we can actually look at some of these differences, or we can actually address some of these issues. What are your thoughts? What should we be doing?
I think the first thing we should be doing is have the conversation. As communities, it's very, very, very important that we come together and have the conversation, sort of to kill that sort of superiority complex that exists within society. And further to that, sitting here 27 years later and discussing the same issues my forefathers had to die for is kind of sad. So I, as a young person, do not want this to progress, that maybe in 20 years to come, we should not be having the same conversation. So as a community, we need to sit down and sort of have these discussions. I'm very grateful that today we are actually having this discussion. So for me, it's a matter of let us speak it out. And while we speak it out, let us not sugarcoat things, put them in a nice sense, because in honesty, the only way we as a society can come together and build each other is when we are honest with each other. And when we don't say things like it's defense, but only to find out that the underlying circumstances are actually not with the motive of defense. So for me, that's it. We need to talk it out. We need to respect each other. We need to sort of look beyond the color of each and everybody's skin.
Yes, I'm just looking at some of the comments, obviously, that are coming through, and one of them is saying, who is being charged for sabotaging our country economy? This is treason. It's a propaganda that makes people feel victimized. Poor people everywhere don't burn schools, do they? Now, that has come through from one of the listeners. Advocate Mohamed Saleem, now, last week, you and I had a chat, and on the question of leadership that Pastor Lazarus had raised as well. And also, the question that I had asked Thapelo in terms of accountability and responsibility. And I think one of the biggest problems we are faced with, got a problem of irresponsible leadership in the country. And I think written about that is particularly a commander-in-chief of the EFF. But there are many others, obviously, who have made very inflammatory and irresponsible statements. Now, for us to move forward, obviously, that needs to be nipped in the bud first before we can actually move forward.
We need to be objective, and we also need to be fair and truthful. Now, a comment which I heard earlier, which cannot go unaddressed, is that if a people participated in an uprising in order to acquire much needed food, why then would those people destroy? Forget about plundering and looting, that is a different matter. Why would they then destroy and burn those very premises from which things were stolen? Now, this is relevant to the question which you ask, and that is about leadership. I think we're all in agreement that this was not simply an uprising in order to address the impoverished circumstances of the poor. This was an exploitation of that impoverishment by anarchic elements that sought to destabilize the country. And I think Neeshan, made reference to the fact that there are perhaps elements, and indeed I've heard this rumor, who have been prosecuted or who are in the process of being prosecuted and who sought to derive the advantage of destabilization, which could then address and perhaps cause the focus on their misconduct or on their corrupt conduct not to be the focal point of attention. In other words, if there was destabilization, if there was a new cabinet that was appointed, then those charges that were instituted or that were about to be instituted might very well be compromised. And that might be one of the causes for the encouragement of the destabilization process. So this is not merely an uprising to address the lack of food. It's not that. It is an exploitation by anarchic elements of people who are impoverished. And to hark back to that particular point, yes, indeed, 27 years down the line, we're still faced with people living under impoverished conditions, people living under indignified conditions, where access to education is not forthcoming. These are matters of concern, and these are matters which the government has to address. But really, this uprising was an uprising which was properly planned and orchestrated. Why was it that the police were not present for a certain period of time, forcing people to defend themselves? But let us look at the question which you specifically put, Inayet, and that is the position of our leadership and how they influence the position and could influence position going forward. I responded to a videotape that was circulated in which Malema made very derogatory and inflammatory statements. He said words to the effect that Indians should go back to India and that vigilantes will now enter Indian homes in order to address criminal conduct if the police were tardy in their investigations. Look, the point of the matter is this. Should someone have engaged in criminal conduct? Should someone, I think Aisha made reference to the fact that defense is used as an excuse for inflicting violence upon people. And I think what she meant was certain so-called Indian people inflicted violence against so-called African people and are using self-defense as an excuse. Now, if that in fact ensued, if there were people who under the guise of defending themselves inflicted injuries upon people, then there's a process which must be followed. The criminal justice system is adequately established in our country to address those matters. But this does not give anyone the right to take the law into their own hands. If someone is hungry, then go on your protest marches. Question the government, because the government is obliged to ensure that there's adequate work for the poor, that there's adequate facilities, that there's adequate accommodation. It's a constitutional right. Now, one cannot take the law into one's hands and justify plundering and looting because there is poverty. This cannot be justified. Then there'll never be law and order. There'll be anarchy, there'll be uprisings, there'll be deaths, and there'll be complete chaos. One has to be balanced in one's approach. Now, the unfortunate reality is, and it is rumored, that the police were not present because they were instructed by the powers that be not to intervene. Now, the question which one asks is this rumor unfounded or ill-founded? Is it inconsistent with logic? Well, let's ask ourselves. The police generally respond to acts of violence. They generally respond to robberies, acts of violence, assaults, etc. Why did they not respond when they obviously were aware of the fact that there was all this violence being perpetrated? I mean, they were armed. Why was the military, assistance from the military, not engaged immediately? The news that there was this plundering and looting and lives were being lost, this spread like wildfire. Why did it take so long for the police to be engaged? Why did it take so long for the military to be engaged? This lends some degree of truth to the rumor that there was some type of instruction by some person in authority or persons in authority that the police should disengage or not participate or not interrupt the plundering and the looting. I mean, this is what caused the reaction from the people. And this would be irresponsible conduct on the part of any leader, highly irresponsible conduct. And in the fullness of time, investigations will reveal where this emanated from and why this was in fact the case. But really, it is so important for one to have proper and balanced leadership. I can say this, Inayet and listeners and fellow participants, that there has been a conference scheduled by a forum that was years ago founded by the South African Police Service, the religious forum that was attended approximately a day or two ago, attended by religious leaders who are representative of the populace in the various different areas, pastors and other religious leaders from Bombay, from Mauti, from Inanda, met with religious leaders from Phoenix, and they decided that what they would do is go back to their followers and urge their followers to reinstate that peaceful coexistence that was there prior to this uprising. What cannot be disputed is there was peaceful coexistence, firstly. Secondly, there was an uprising. There was plundering and looting, and there were people who lost their lives. People who were being attacked lost their lives. There was a reaction, and there was a loss of further lives. And in this process, I have no doubt in my mind that many people, from the plunderers and looters, as well as those who reacted, would have exceeded the bounds of self-defense. I have no doubt about that. That is an objective and balanced and honest perspective of this. And they must be brought to book. Those who perpetrated have infringed the law, and they must be brought to book. But there is no justification for the leadership, and whoever they might be, whether the leader of the EFF, Malema, or any other leader, there's absolutely no justification for them to make inflammatory and racist statements. We must appreciate that the position is still sensitive. We must be alive to the sensitivity. People have lost relatives, and we must be sensitive to that loss. The loss of human life is regretted. Under any circumstances, the loss of human life is regretted. But now, let's juxtapose this with what is fair and what is just. Our law provides that if someone attacks you, if someone attacks your property, you are entitled to defend yourself. You're entitled to defend your property. And in the process, the law also allows for you to take life in the defense of yourself, and in appropriate circumstances, in the defense of your property. In fact, let me refer you to a publication in the Government Gazette, 14th of July 2021. Although this relates primarily to the powers restated in relation to the defense force, this right applies also to ordinary civilians. And it reads, Section 11 of that publication, 14th of July 2021, the right to self-defense may be exercised to defend oneself, other members, prime mission equipment, PME, property, SAPS members, and any member of the public. And I emphasize this, and it is emphasized in the provision, where life is threatened and or where there is an imminent threat of serious injury or destruction of property. Where there have been live firing, it must be reported and recorded within reasonable time. The report to include the place, how many rounds were fired, and the outcome of the action in self-defense. Here it is. It's part of our law, ladies and gentlemen. And we must acknowledge that the law is there to maintain order. And we must comply with the law. And where someone infringes the law, then they must meet with the consequences pursuant thereto. If, Aisha, you are concerned that some member of the Indian community has taken the law into his own hand and exceeded the bounds of self-defense, then he must be brought to book. There must be criminal proceedings instituted against him. If one exceeds the bounds of self-defense and takes life in the process, that amounts to murder, and he must be charged with murder. But by the same token, those who plundered and looted, and those who destroyed property, according to the very provision which I've read, they had subjected themselves to the risk of the consequences pursuant upon self-defense. And if they lost their lives in the process, it is regrettable. It is unfortunate. I lament the loss of life. But under the circumstances, the law permitted it. And for me to now say that the person who acted in self-defense, defending his life, defending his property during this onslaught, must now apologize for having done this because in the process a life was lost, is unfair. Because he acted within the framework of the law. Of course, he must lament the loss of life. he must feel extremely aggrieved that the circumstances occasioned his conduct, which culminated in the loss of life, of course, at a human level. But for one to expect someone who acted properly and within the framework of the law to now apologize, because this is the rhetoric I've heard. Indians must now apologize for having taken the lives of African people. Certainly, those who took the lives of people unjustifiably, not within the framework of the law, must not only apologize, but they must meet the consequences pursuant thereto. But to expect now someone who acted properly to now concede that has done something wrong is in itself wrong. It's unjustifiable. Of course, he must lament the loss of life. We all lament the loss of life. If I was to take a life of a person who attacked me and where my life was under threat or where my property was under threat, I will, of course, lament the fact that I had to take a life. Life is sanctimonious. It is a gift given by God. I will lament the fact, but I have to balance this out objectively. And in the balance, I have to determine whether I was justified and entitled to conduct myself in that way. And if I was, then it is unfair to expect me to concede that I did wrong when I in fact did not do wrong. And this call by certain leaders for members of the Indian community as a whole to now apologize because of the loss of lives implies a concession that they acted incorrectly. And the law, our law says they did not act incorrectly if they acted in self-defense or in defense of the property. All I'm saying, people, is this. We must act in accordance with our law. And if we don't act in accordance with our laws, if we act in accordance with emotions, then this country will cease to exist. There will be further loss of life. There will
Advocate
be,
Saleem,
and there will be loss of democratic
shukran
ideals.
for that. Obviously, we've got quite a bit of ground to cover, and I see this program obviously is moving very, very fast, and I think 2 hours possibly won't do justice to what we have to discuss. I just want to get through to Pastor Lazarus again. Now, Pastor Lazarus, we know for the fact, and I see many comments coming through on my WhatsApp comment, and people are actually commenting about third forces that are operating in terms of dividing the community and what they would basically gain from there as well. And I think this is important, and we should not obviously throw this narrative out of the window, because there are people who would thrive, who would take advantage of the situation, who would capitalize on the situation for their benefit. And we know what is obviously playing out within the ANC. We know within the government, factionalism is obviously playing out as well. And one obviously needs to be wary, one needs to be careful. And as a society comprising of people coming from different backgrounds, from different social standings, one needs to be aware of the fact that there could possibly be forces in play that seek to basically divide what we have even further.
To reiterate that, what's important, and to also echo the sentiments of all my colleagues on this show and to the listeners today.
Yes, I think we lost Pastor there. We have lost Pastor Thapelo. Are you with us?
Yes.
Yes, Thapelo, this is the question that I had obviously asked Pastor Lazarus, but also at the same time, I'm just looking at some of the comments that is coming through with regard to the government. And one of the comments that says, if 30% of the ANC is corrupt and 30% is not corruptible, the middle 40% holds away. And the president himself admitted that they were caught napping, but they are still napping, because when will they arrest those who are guilty of treason? Now, this obviously, from what Advocate Mohamed Saleem Khan says as well, that this was organized crime. And now to focus on what had happened in Phoenix and to focus on racism, yet forgetting the build-up. And obviously, we've heard about the 12 that the government says that they know of, I'm not too sure at this point in time how many they've arrested out of the 12, but at the end of the day, we're talking about accountability as well. And those that have been responsible, particularly those in positions of power, need to be held accountable. They need to be held responsible.
Yes, certainly. I agree that there needs to be some form of accountability. However, I will still lament that the poorest of the poor saw an opportunity and they went and they took food. It was not an uprising of the poorest of the poor, but had this government provided the poorest of the poor with services, provided with the poorest of the poor with basic income grants, had the poor of the poor had jobs, access to jobs, I don't think this would have been successful. The poor of the poor would not be caught in between those who had. And I think it's very clear. I want to clarify that. In our statement, we made it very clear that those who bombed and banned were not. Those had a goal that they have to achieve. And those are the ones that need to be brought into book. And those are the ones who cripple the economy. A pack of rice does not cripple the economy. But I'm saying that we are in this because we don't have leadership. The ANC cabinet itself is conflicted. There are those who are pro the former president, and there are those who are honestly enough trying to solve issues that are faced. I mean, you have a minister of defense who says it's not insurgents. There is the president who says it's insurgents. There's a police minister who says it's insurgents. So there's completely lack of leadership that is there in the government itself. So if we have a government that is weak, it shows that the reason why they have failed over the years to deal with the fundamental issues of inequality in this country is what we see today. And I think as much as we have had to hold those who are corrupt, like those who were involved in the state capture, those who were involved in the COVID funds that were about to take us through this pandemic. Remember, we are in this crisis because 500 billion disappeared during the pandemic. We would have fought this pandemic easily. We would have had the virus.
Yes, I think Thapelo, obviously, we have Thapelo has frozen. Pastor Lazarus?
I mean, the vaccine easily. We don't let.
Yes. Thank you.
Yes, I see Thapelo is
Can you
obviously
hear me?
frozen, but Pastor, you can continue. Yes, the question that I had raised with you and with regard to the third force.
Yes, coming back to my point earlier, what I was saying is that, and I think we should take cognizance of the fact that discussing issues that are currently now, which I'm not saying they are not relevant, and I'm not saying they are not important. I'm saying they are very important and they're very relevant, but it's exactly, in my personal view, that it's exactly what the third force would have us to do. Yes, they use the weapon of poverty. They use the weapons of a community that has possibly got issues lurking around there. And we must be very cognizant that if we continue to grapple about these issues, which I'm not, please don't get me wrong, I'm not watering it down, but we need to understand that if any third force can believe that they can shut down the South African economy, create anarchy in our country, undermine our democracy, undermine the power of states, whatever it is, it's the very government that built this very constitution. It's the very party that has spent some 100 years trying to build this country in what they believe. And if we have, and that's why government is investigating, and we need to allow the rule of law, and we need to allow the perpetrators to be brought to book. As long as communities are going to make the noise of what we are currently looking, we are playing right into the hands of third force, because this is what they want. They want communities to fight about poverty. They want communities to fight about subsequent racism. They want communities to fight about all these issues. And we as civil society, we have an obligation to respond. When the baby cries, we have to. And we must allow our country, we must allow our communities to do what we have to do to deal with our communities in the issues. Thapelo is doing a great job there on the ground, and we have to deal with the issues on the ground. But the main issue is that if anybody believes they can use this weapon, then they will do it again and again, and then we're just a banana republic. Then there's no longer economy. We'll have no currency. We'll have no stable Johannesburg, whatever stock exchange we want to believe in. We'll have no valuable asset. We'll have no valuable country. So it's imperative and important for us to not water down the seriousness of this threat. This threat is important. And I mean, Thapelo will tell you that communities are always hungry. Communities were always in need, but civil society will always ravel around to the leadership like Thapelo and his team. They will find ways to feed impoverished communities, whether it's through winter warmth, whether it's to a hot meal now and again, and maybe 2 or 3 days might miss, but the next day or wherever we will get assistance. But to think that looting of a mall or just running into a shopping center and just taking what you want to take, and if that's going to be the answer, it's not going to be the answer, because the next day the food's going to run out, and the next week the food's going to run out, and then we're not going to have a shopping mall to buy. So the third force is exactly wanting to play into what we are playing, in my personal view, is to have these kind of conversations. And I'm not watering them down, so don't get me wrong. I'm not saying they're not important. I'm not saying they're not prevalent, and I'm not saying that they're not real. I'm saying that this is the evidence, and that's what we're having. At the moment right now, we are not looking for the perpetrators. The civil society and communities are not assisting and running around to find who are the perpetrators that are on the ground, who are lobbying on the ground, who are still having foot soldiers on the ground, dividing communities, sending out fake messages, trying to instill more violence, intimidate communities, and do all these kind of things. And the fact is, we're saying that it should be our control. That should be, we should not allow the baby to be cut up in two, even though the baby might be injured, even though we might be having issues that we need to relate to, issues that we need to speak about. And let's deal with these issues that we want to deal with. But to ignore the very fact that what Neeshan had said, that if you believe that if you follow me and if you advance against me, I'm going to do exactly what I said I'm going to do. And again, we're hearing in the current situation right now, we are hearing this on social media, we're hearing this on the news. People still have the audacity to threaten the South African economy, threaten the government, threaten the institutions of law, threaten the institutions of state, threaten our economy. What are we? I mean, we had an interview on BBC the other day with our Speaker of Parliament, and you know, it was absolutely embarrassing to hear a conversation like that in the international platforms. Is to see what, and these are the governing agencies that governs global economies. And we must understand right now, we must not just be emotional, and we understand that poverty will be there. We understand we'll be needing food. We understand that we'll be needing clothes. And I'm not watering down that there is poor communities. But right now, Thapelo will say to you, when the need happened, he himself said that right now, it was truckloads of bread that came in from communities, and that's what our communities are. We will help our communities to do what we have to do. We'll rebuild again. We'll have to do that because that's what we as South Africans do. And we'll share and we'll build. And I want to say this one more time, that what you just said now, Mr. Wadee, is that we must not negate the fact that we all need to rally together with institutes and organizations of cause and action to make sure that from the ground, we need to investigate and root out the ones who are trying to divide us, the ones who are trying to break us, and they're trying to take away our focus from the very itch, the focus from the very itch. And that's what my previous speakers have said, that if someone can do that today, then tomorrow it'll be a cut thief who is going to court, for example, for some case, will say, okay, I'm going to burn down a courthouse. And I'm going to burn down the courthouse because I'm going to be there. And these are the kind of things, Mr. Wadee, we must be very cognizant about, to use civil society for advocating for this.
Well, thank you for that, Pastor. And I think you've raised very, very important issues here. And Neeshan, just to obviously follow up, and there are one or two questions that are directed at you which is related to what Pastor has actually been saying. And the key issue here is we know that there has been huge damage to the country, to the economy, to the structures within which we operate as well. And looking at leadership, looking at government, and we see very little in terms of decisive leadership regarding this particular issue. It appears, and the reason why this momentum here, while people are still making a lot of inflammatory statements, while people are still having a go at each other, becoming insulting, and we see racist behavior and racist tendency as well. And the question that's asking, saying, who is being charged for sabotaging our country, our economy? This is treason. And going on, saying that, even referring to the president, saying that why are these inciters allowed to create the impression that this is another Marikana? Did Cyril call their bluff? Is that why he sent the soldiers so late? So these inciters are trying to create a massacre, and Phoenix has been the target. So these are the questions, these are the discussions that are taking place in the absence of decisive leadership, and more importantly, in making sure that the situation is diffused firstly, but also at the end of the day to eliminate, what we see, the nonsense that is taking place around us, Neeshan.
Yeah, well, I think when we talk about leadership, we actually are missing the fact that there is leadership from Abahlali, from the Phoenix Residents Association, in a time of crisis with Pastor and whoever and everybody else in and around Phoenix, as well as around every other area that's been affected by the kind of destruction that we've seen. These are local leaders that have emerged. They didn't wait for some messiah to come. If you take this young man, Lux, at the mall in Soweto, he and a range of people there organized others. They defended that mall. They didn't wait for anybody to come and lead them. They provided leadership, and moments of crisis throws up leaders, and those leaders would need to be nurtured and their leadership role expanded beyond the crisis. And that's, I think, going to be one of the big takeaways of this particular period. You've seen leaders emerging around the kinds of community safety networks, crossing race, crossing religion, crossing all kinds of barriers that would have been there in the past. And that is a different kind of leadership. But I think we had a forum in Gauteng last week. We managed to get the premier of this province to attend a virtual provincial gathering of over 400 odd people, almost 250 plus civil society, NGOs, CBOs, and they essentially, the premier was allowed to give us his understanding of what happened, but people didn't buy his story completely. They raised all kinds of questions. They put forward all kinds of suggestions. They were scathing of government's response. And out of that, a fairly comprehensive set of proposals emerged. And that provincial government today, I'm told, have considered a lot of those proposals. And he will then be having to report back to at least the communities of Gauteng. Now, that's the kind of engagement that you would want to see in a time of crisis. You would want to see people on the ground, but you would also want them to be engaging, and you would want them to be listening firsthand as to what has happened, what needs to be done, and then coming back to you with a plan, an integrated community safety plan that is developed to deal with moments of crisis. Now that for me is an element of leadership. Mandela's leadership at the early 90s, when there was war in KZN, going to people there to preach a message of peace was the kind of leadership that you need in a crisis like this. It's not a kind of leadership that begins to deepen the divides, that deepens the antagonisms, as deep as they might be. But you need leadership to help people cross the bridge, to find the common points, and working on those common points to then find solutions that are lasting at a local level and beyond. We need to think about how we use the leadership that has emerged in this crisis to now deepen the democratic deficits that we have to deal with. How do we demand areas of accountability? So if you take the president has sat on a security review report for almost 8 months that's made very serious recommendations about the state security agency and how that needs to be changed. Society must demand that he starts acting on that report. Society must now say to him, we can't take the squabbling between the national minister and the National Police Commissioner. It is just not on in any democracy that kind of squabble paralyzes an entire security system. We need to be, and that I think people in Bombay, people in Phoenix would all want more effective security. It is something that they would want to in common. And I think if leadership begins to say, yeah, the issues that we have in common, let's do it. There is a huge demand for the introduction of a basic income grant. There's a lot of work being done to show that it can be provided by the state. This will apply to people across color, across geographical divides. But some leaders need to bring them together to say, is this a solution to our problem? If it is a solution, how do we make our voices heard behind these kinds of ideas? So leaders find issues that have commonality with the widest range of people, gets them to act behind it, and leads them through the battles needed to, in fact, win those victories. That's the kind of leadership you need now. But I don't think we must look for the Mandela-type leadership to emerge at this point in time. It's never going to happen, which is perhaps a good thing. I think we need a vast multiplicity of leaders at very local level who can begin to then play bigger roles at provincial and national levels after having emerged from a very grassroots base. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Neeshan. I see we've got about 19 minutes before we end the show, and I'm going to go around the panel. I see Thapelo is not with us, but Aisha, just to start off with you now, before I get to you, there's a comment that says, please consider who are the people that out these food parcels. Are they whites? Are they blacks? No, they are the same Indians that are being called racists. We are South African first, and then Indians born and brought up, proud to be a South African. And also there's another comment that has come through, and obviously this is relating to you, Aisha, where the listener is saying that, did Indians go to the townships to hurt them? No, they haven't. Imagined corrupt people, corrupt thugs are now talking on behalf of poor blacks. How disgusting. There has to be a third force behind all this chaos. And as Aisha says, Indians use self-defense as an excuse. Now, these are just some of the comments that are coming through, Aisha. Perhaps a quick comment on some of these comments that have been made, but also moving from here, moving forward, what needs to be done?
As I said earlier on, that we as a society need to engage, firstly. And further to that, we need to review our leadership. And mostly also try and, we can never shy away from the fact.
Sorry, Aisha, can I just stop you? You're saying review our leadership. What leadership are you talking about?
I mean provincial, national, and also local. Because it's a known truth that our leadership is failing us, because we cannot have such a thing happening and not have our leadership becoming effective. And also to add on that, I think what we mostly need to do is, we must not have these small conversations in our little corridors, which mount up and build up, and then at a later stage when they come out, we are unable to handle them as a society. We must engage. Engagement is the first thing we need to do, and our leadership needs to be effective. We also as a society need to go back and choose better. And another thing is, we can never shy away from the fact that we are different as people. And as we are different as people, we need to learn to understand each other, tolerate each other, and work together. Because working together also helps us not have such issues. And further to that, we must, reaction is also very important. How you react is also important, because you cannot react and then your reaction today, tomorrow is something else, something that has spiraled out of control. Because take for instance, the reaction, as advocate Mohamed Saleem Khan terms it, that has happened in Phoenix has not only affected the people in Phoenix, but has affected people all over the country. Today I was in a taxi, and I had the taxi driver say, whenever I see an Indian, I just want to get out and beat the Indian to death, because what happened to our people is sad. And now it's such things that you sit and you say, but South African Indians are also people, right? And we ought to live together in harmoniously, without anybody pointing at each other that, oh, this one did me this, or this one did me this. But how do you do that when, there's that racial line that, and that, this is an Indian, this is a black person, and there's also that form of superiority complex where in some cases some Indians assume that they are better than black people. How do we also then how do we heal, so to say, from here? Because now we also have some South African Indians are saying that no, people were defending themselves, and now yes, some were defending themselves, but now how do you say you are defending yourself when you kill a mother having a child and coming out of the clinic? What did that mother do? What are you defending yourself from that person? So we need to review our leadership. We need to sort of work together. We need to understand each other. Some people may be poorer than the others. Some people may have, some may not have. But it's all about us then putting ourselves in the position of those who don't have, and understanding them, understanding their frame of mind, understanding that instead of me saying, oh, these bloody black people are looting, these bloody black people are doing this, try and understand. Yes, I solemnly condemn looting. Looting is wrong in all forms. But now also understanding is also important, because it puts us at a better situation as a society. It makes us understand each other.
Thank you for that, Aisha. Pastor Lazarus, about 4 minutes I'm going to give you now. Aisha obviously talks about healing, and that is what needs to be done. But at the end of the day, to heal, one needs to obviously come to terms with what happened, but also at the same time, not carry that animosity. And it is a concern when Aisha speaks about a taxi driver talking about, when he sees driving past and he sees that person of Indian origin or so-called Indian origin making those type of remarks, obviously is not going to help the healing process. And we need to first get out of that mindset, out of that mentality, before we talk about healing and moving forward.
Yeah, and I think, Mr. Wadee, thank you, and I'll do it in 4 minutes, is that generalization is a very, very dangerous thing, because I think we need to have the ability where there are good people and there are people questionable. And I think generalization is where the issue is. And I think we must need to look at things more constructively. And as Aisha had said, we need to deal with a lot of things. And there's lots of multiples over here. And you can't deal with one multiple, with one solution or a one size fit all. You've got to have each one in its own track. As Neeshan has said earlier, yes, there might be issues that are deep rooted, and we realize the band-aid approach has not worked. But then again, once we have the ability to have that conversation, we need to have that conversation. I want to just share that lots of our constituents, and Advocate Saleem had said the same thing, and I know that some of our constituents has been there already. They are already on the ground. They're not waiting for leadership. Leadership is within them. They rise up, and that's what many of our South Africans are. They're leaders in their own way. And we don't need the follow the leader mentality, because we're seeing it on the ground right now, advocating for peace, advocating for direction. Yes, there is this odd few that are, inciting violence and inciting more negative news. But there are leadership out there also that are dealing with that. So yes, on the ground right now, from south coast to the north coast, right here in KwaZulu-Natal and all the way to the Midlands, lots of the constituents, be it all religious organizations, civil society, whatever, they all have been mobilized and mobilized naturally. This has come through a natural, a natural reflection and a reaction to first talk peace, restore, and then once everything is restored and feed the poor, we can then start dealing with the deep-rooted issues, because it's important, and we know for a fact that we don't have a leadership that can deal with it. 27 years, and something is lost, and someone switched off the lights, and now we have major issues. There's load shedding in morality. There's load shedding on a whole lot of issues of moral fiber, the social fiber. All has been decayed and all has been non-existent. So civil society needs to rise up, community needs to rise up, and we need to get in there right now and fix each other and then deal with all these other issues along the way. So I think that's what my view is. The fixing way is to get out there and do what is human. Love knows no boundaries, and giving knows no boundaries. It's not a religion. Love is just who we are, and humanity. Just chase humanity and do what we have to do.
Yes, Advocate Mohamed Saleem, about 4 minutes as well. Now, obviously, you mentioned right up front when you introduced yourself, you spoke about, a lot, obviously, a lot of bad has obviously taken place, but good also has come out of this. And just building on the good that you've been talking about and moving forward from here so that, the sooner we get to a normal situation, the better it's going to be for everybody. Advocate Saleem, if you could just unmute. Okay, perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Billions of rands has been expended on food hampers pre the COVID era. It's continued into the COVID-19 era, and it continues even after the unrest, as the pastor has indicated, that there was bread and milk distributed in substantial quantities, and this continues to be distributed by the so-called Indian community in the so-called areas from where the very people who plundered and looted emanated. This is a very positive indicator. This is an indicator that people must learn to forgive and forget, but by the same token, be robust in eradicating all those elements which influence the uprising. We must resist the influence of anarchic politicians. We must remedy the impoverishment of our people. These are our people in our country. Why should there be people who do not have food? Why should there be people who are capable of being exploited into acts of violence by anarchic politicians, but based on their impoverishment? We must eradicate this impoverishment. We must ensure that our poor are not made susceptible to this type of anarchic exploitation. Peaceful coexistence, my brothers and sisters, is absolutely essential. It is vital. We must be robust in preserving this. We must address and eliminate anarchic influences that are anathemic to peaceful coexistence. And we must not only pay lip service to this, we must move our politicians, we must move our government to take active steps in eradicating this impoverishment. This corruption that pervades society, unfortunately, has to be eradicated. Those funds directed to improving the lot of the poor.
Shukran for that, Advocate Mohamed Saleem. Neeshan, final thoughts from you. You've got about 4 minutes as well.
No, thank you. Let me just read a paragraph from our statement in 1 minute. It says, tackling deep-rooted divisions, racial prejudices, and inequality will require consistent work over generations. It requires leadership that can bridge divides and build on the common dreams and aspirations of people from all sides. Despite the deep-rooted racial divisions of South Africa, most people yearn for a united country. The missing ingredient in making this happen is consistent and committed leadership to get the work done. Now, I think that sums up what we have been talking about. But in response to the advocate, we cannot go back to what was called the normal. That normal is one that is just unjust, it's unequal, it's divided in every way imaginable in this country. We need to think about a new and different kind of society and democracy and work towards that. We need to discard the normal. The normal is what created conditions for crooks and state capturers to emerge. Normal was a political system that didn't work, an electoral system that gives us unaccountable leadership. That normal we can't go back to. So I think we need to move beyond what we think was normal and start creating an idea of a new society that addresses all of these issues in their totality. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And to the panels, to Nontobeko, Aisha, to Neeshan, Balton, Pastor Lazarus, and also Advocate Mohamed, Saleem Khan, and I know Thapelo obviously has left us. We thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out and being part of the panel discussion here on Salam Media with us this evening, and also in the company of all the other radio stations, CII, Channel Islam, Al-Ansar, Durban, Pietermaritzburg, and also Sirius 105.7 FM out on the East End. We value your time. Please be safe. All the best, and we trust and hope that sanity prevails, and we see peace, we see harmony in this country, and we see prosperity as well for all of us and for the majority of the people in the country. Take care.
Thank you very much, and greetings to everybody.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of Wednesday Nights with Inayet, Wadee. And once again, I must say, it's been wonderful. It's been fascinating being in your company, in the company of our listeners at Salam Media on the various platforms. And remember, this interview went out live. It's still on the Salam Media YouTube channel. You can also view it on Salam Media's Facebook page. And it's been great assembling this panel, this very important discussion. And at the end of the day, there are so many issues, there are underlying issues, and this country obviously cannot afford what we have witnessed in the last few weeks or so. And at the end of the day, sanity needs to prevail. It requires level heads from all and sundry, but also it requires leadership. It requires decisive leadership on the part of government, but also as communities, as societies, in terms of social cohesion, in terms of coming together, in terms of building societies that are tolerant of each other, that can coexist with each other in peace, can assist each other in times of need. Because I think this is what South Africa is about. This is what South African society is about. And Advocate Saleem mentioned this since the time of the outbreak of COVID-19. We've seen so much come through by way of solidarity, by way of support, by way of assistance, by way of feeding schemes, where thousands and thousands of people, millions have been assisted by communities, by society, and we've seen millions of rands being spent. And this we've seen as our duty as humanity. And at the same time, one cannot see our neighbors, one cannot see a section of society going through the type of poverty, going through the type of hunger, the suffering, and that they have been exposed to. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. And once again, as I said, it's been an absolute pleasure. We want to pay special thanks to the other media houses, to CII, Channel Islam International on Channel 865 on DSTV on free to air. Wonderful having you with us. Also, Al-Ansar in Durban, 90.4 FM, Pietermaritzburg, 105.6 FM. Great that you were able to join us for this broadcast, and also on the East End, Sirius FM 105.7. We thank you. We do appreciate you taking time and listening to us this evening on Wednesday nights with Inayet, Wadee. And with that, I'm going to be signing off. It's been wonderful being in your company. From myself and the team at Salam Media, we wish you well. We wish you good health. We wish you safety, and all the best to you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.